September 23rd, 2009, 0547 hours, Korangal Valley, Afghanistan. Sergeant Marcus Webb had 60 seconds to make a decision that would get him court-martialed. 300 meters above him, Taliban fighters held a ridgeline that had already killed 15 Americans. 2 assault attempts, 0 ground gained, 40 soldiers pinned down below. Standard doctrine said never climb under fire. Webb reached for his rope anyway. What he was about to do had no place in any infantry manual. Climb 60 meters of exposed granite, while enemy machine guns fired overhead, with no backup, no orders, no permission. And somehow, for the next 90 minutes, one man with climbing gear would break a 6-week stalemate that an entire company with air support could not. But here's what you need to understand about Marcus Webb. He wasn't supposed to be the guy who did this. Marcus Webb was not born to be a soldier. He was born in Bend, Oregon, in 1982, a small mountain town where the timber industry was dying and tourism hadn't filled the gap yet. His father, Daniel, worked at a sawmill until it closed when Marcus was 12. Then he drove logging trucks until a back injury forced him onto disability. His mother, Sarah, cleaned vacation rentals in summer and worked retail during ski season. The Webbs lived in a rental house at the base of the Cascade Range, middle of 3 boys, nearest neighbor a quarter-mile away. The kind of place where you learn to handle things yourself because help isn't coming. Before the Army, Marcus worked at a climbing gear shop on Wall Street. Not New York's Wall Street, but Bend's main drag, where tourists bought expensive equipment they barely knew how to use. He repaired harnesses, rethreaded carabiners, spent lunch breaks free climbing the basalt cliffs behind town. His hands developed calluses in specific patterns. His fingers learned to find purchase on rock faces that looked smooth to everyone else. Nothing special about him, just a retail worker who could climb. His father told him once, "The mountain doesn't care about your plan. You read what it gives you." That single sentence would save 40 lives. Marcus didn't enlist because of patriotism. He enlisted in November 2001 because the climbing shop couldn't give him enough hours and disability checks don't stretch across 3 teenage boys. He walked into the recruiting office in Redmond, signed papers, and headed to Fort Benning for infantry training. At basic, he was unremarkable. Average PT scores, adequate marksmanship, no leadership positions. But instructors noticed he volunteered for every rope work detail, rappelling, climbing obstacles, rigging loads. He spent personal time studying knots that weren't in the manual, alpine butterflies, Prusik hitches, Munter hitches for emergency rappels. Other privates gave him a nickname, Spider-Man. It wasn't a compliment. They thought he was wasting time on skills infantry would never use. But what if they were wrong? When his unit deployed to Afghanistan in March 2009, Webb was a specialist in Bravo Company, 2nd Battalion, 503rd Infantry Regiment. Just another rifleman with an M4 and a rucksack headed into the most hostile valley in Afghanistan, the Korangal Valley. 6 miles long, 5 miles from the Pakistan border in Kunar Province. Mountains rising 8,000 feet on both sides. Valley floor barely 400 meters wide, choked with cedar trees and terraced farmland. 1 dirt road, barely wide enough for a single Humvee. The enemy here wasn't disorganized insurgents. These were Hezb-e-Islami Gulbuddin fighters and Pakistani militants who'd been fighting in these mountains since the Soviet War. They knew every ridge, every draw, every approach. They pre-positioned ammunition in caves. They dug fighting positions into solid rock with overlapping fields of fire. And American tactics were failing. So why were American tactics failing? Because they were designed for different terrain. Armored vehicles couldn't climb mountains. Artillery couldn't hit reverse slope positions. Airstrikes were restricted by rules of engagement designed to prevent civilian casualties. Every time infantry tried to maneuver uphill, Taliban machine guns on higher ground cut them apart. Standard doctrine said, suppress with fire, flank with infantry, call close air support if needed. But you can't suppress enemies in hardened positions. You can't flank when every approach is a kill zone. And CAS can't hit targets on reverse slopes without danger-close strikes that risked American casualties. If the Taliban held the high ground around Firebase Phoenix, they could eventually overrun the base itself. 40 American soldiers. 100 Afghan National Army soldiers, all trapped in a valley where medevac helicopters took fire on every approach. The crisis began 3 days before Webb's climb. September 20th, 0630 hours. Firebase Phoenix. Lieutenant Keller, the platoon leader, pointed at a map showing a ridgeline 800 meters west of the base. They hit us with RPGs yesterday from up there. 3 impacts. No casualties, but they're walking rounds closer. If they dial it in, they'll hit the TOC, the Tactical Operations Center, the base's nervous system. The patrol plan was conventional. 2 squads would push up the southern approach, suppress the positions, force the Taliban to withdraw. Standard infantry tactics. 3 hours, maybe 4. Webb didn't say anything during the briefing, but he'd been studying that ridgeline for 2 weeks. He saw what the lieutenant didn't see. The southern approach had exactly 1 route through the rocks, and that route was a perfect funnel. Whoever held the high ground could massacre anyone trying to come up. The patrol stepped off at 0700 hours. By 0730, the valley erupted. The distinct crack of M4 carbines, the deeper pop of AK-47s, the sustained rip of a PKM machine gun that didn't stop. The radio at Phoenix crackled with panic. "Contact! Taking fire from prepared positions! We have multiple wounded!" Wounded came back on litters 2 hours later. 4 soldiers, 1 with an AK round through the shoulder, 1 with shrapnel from an RPG that detonated 3 meters away, 2 with gunshot wounds to the legs. The patrol had gained 200 meters. The Taliban hadn't moved at all. September 21st. Second attempt. More firepower this time. 60mm mortars, a full platoon, smoke for concealment. The Taliban waited. When the smoke cleared, they opened up with machine guns from positions the mortars hadn't touched. 3 more wounded, 1 with a sucking chest wound who nearly died on the medevac bird. 0 ground gained. September 22nd. Lieutenant Keller called for air support. 2 F-16s made passes over the ridgeline, but they couldn't get visual confirmation of enemy positions without flying danger close to the tree line. Rules of engagement required PID, positive identification, before releasing ordnance. The pilots circled for 30 minutes and left without dropping a single bomb. That night, Webb sat outside his hooch at Phoenix, staring at the ridgeline silhouetted against stars. He'd memorized every feature. The main Taliban position was a rock outcrop, shaped like a fist, 300 meters up from the valley floor. Below it, a cliff face dropped nearly vertical for 60 meters, unclimbable by any tactical infantry unit, which meant no American soldier would ever try. But Webb wasn't thinking like an infantryman anymore. He was thinking like a climber. So what was Webb seeing that everyone else missed? That cliff wasn't unclimbable. It was just exposed. And if you could get up it, you'd be directly below the Taliban position, in their blind spot, where they'd never expect anyone to appear. He ran the route in his mind. 60 meters of near vertical granite, maybe a 5.8 grade climb in civilian terms, moderate difficulty for an experienced climber. Handholds visible even from this distance. A crack system running up the left side. A ledge system midway for rest. Doable, barely. But doing it under fire? Wearing 40 pounds of gear? Carrying a rifle? That was insane. He mentioned it once to Sergeant First Class Morrison, his squad leader. Morrison looked at him like he'd suggested flying. "You want to climb a cliff while they're shooting at us?" "They can't shoot straight down," Webb said. "Rock face creates a dead zone." "That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard, Spider-Man." The nickname again. Not respect. Mockery. Webb didn't bring it up again. But he didn't stop thinking about it either. September 23rd, 0430 hours. Firebase Phoenix shook. Taliban mortars. 2 82mm rounds, walking impacts toward the TOC. No casualties yet. But 1 landed 15 meters from the command post, close enough that the next adjustment might be direct. Lieutenant Keller made the call. "We're going up there today. Full platoon. We take that position, or we call in danger close strikes and damn the ROE." Webb knew what that meant. More wounded. Probably KIA this time. He found Morrison at 0500 hours. "Let me try the cliff." Morrison was checking his M4, chambering around. He didn't look up. We already talked about this. One climber. 30 minutes. I get above them. I can mark positions for CAS. You'll get shot. Maybe. Or 40 guys get shot trying the same route that failed twice. Morrison finally looked at him. Long silence. Generators humming. Someone coughing in a distant hooch. Wind moving through cedars. If the LT asks, I never authorized this. Webb nodded. No orders. No backup. No permission. He gathered his equipment in silence. Climbing harness from his personal gear. Unauthorized for deployment, but he'd packed it anyway. 50 meters of 9mm rope. 6 carabiners. Prusik cord. Chalk bag. He stripped down his kit. No body armor, no helmet. Just a chest rig with 6 magazines and his M4 slung across his back. A PRC 148 handheld radio. Smoke grenades, 2 green, 2 red. Total weight, 28 pounds. Light enough to climb, light enough to die. 05:47 hours. Webb reached the base of the cliff. 200 meters south, the platoon was beginning their assault up the conventional route, already taking fire. The PKM machine gun hammering, sharp crack of M4s returning fire. Smoke drifting through cedars. Shouted orders, someone calling for a corpsman. Webb looked up. 60 meters of gray granite. Streaked with lichen, broken by vertical cracks. Morning light just touching the upper edge. The Taliban position was invisible from here. But he knew it was there. 30 meters above the cliff's rim, dug into rock, positioned to fire downslope at anyone approaching from the south. They wouldn't see him coming. They wouldn't expect anyone stupid enough to try. He tied in. Figure 8 knot, double-backed, the same knot he'd tied 1,000 times at the cliffs behind Bend. He tested the rope anchor. Wrapped 3 times around a boulder, secured with a munter mule combination his father would have called bomber. The rope hung free down the cliff face, ready for retreat if needed. He chalked his hands. The dust-absorbed sweat gave friction. He reached for the first handhold and climbed. The first 20 meters were straightforward. Large holds, positive edges where his fingers locked into granite. He moved smoothly, finding rhythm. Right hand up, left foot up, weight shift, right foot follows. His M4 hung across his back, muzzle down. The radio pressed against his chest rig. He didn't look up or down, just the next move, the next hold. At 20 meters, gunfire intensified above him. The Taliban had spotted the main assault force. RPGs launched with their characteristic whoosh, detonating downslope. The PKM machine gun fired in long, sustained bursts, 6, 7, 8 seconds without stopping. Brass casings tumbled off the cliff, tinkling against rock as they fell past him. Webb froze, pressed flat against granite. The firing continued, but not at him. They were fully engaged with the platoon below. He kept climbing. At 30 meters, the angle steepened. Why? Because the easier lower section had given way to the cliff's true face, near vertical granite, with smaller holds. His fingers found a crack system. Vertical fissure in the rock, just wide enough for fingertips. He jammed his left hand into it, twisted, created friction. His right hand searched for a crimp, a tiny edge, barely a fingernail's thickness. His forearms began burning. The altitude didn't help. Thin air at 8,200 feet made every breath feel insufficient. Sweat ran into his eyes despite the cold. The ledge was 5 meters above him. A horizontal break in the rock face, maybe 18 inches deep. Enough to rest. But 5 meters might as well be 50 if his strength gave out. He focused on nothing else. Right hand to a side pull. Left foot smearing against smooth granite. No real hold, just friction from his boot sole. Push up. Right foot to a crystal nub, the size of a marble. Weight shift. The M4 swung against his back. For one horrifying moment, he was off balance, fighting to stay on the rock. Fingers slipping, he steadied, breathed, continued. 4 meters to the ledge. Above him, an RPG detonated. The concussion wave rolled across the cliff face. Rock dust showered down. A piece of shrapnel, maybe 3 inches long, tumbled past him, spinning through space, disappeared into the cedars below. If that shrapnel had hit him, he would have fallen. No way to dodge, no way to take cover. Just gone. 3 meters. His right hand locked onto the ledge edge. Solid. Bomber hold. He pulled, got his left hand up, mantled onto the ledge like pulling out of a swimming pool. He lay flat for 10 seconds. Gasping. Forearms screaming. Heart hammering so hard he could feel it in his throat. Below him, radio chatter. Taking casualties. Need immediate medevac. Webb keyed his radio. 1 click. Signal to Morrison. I'm alive. 2 clicks came back. Acknowledged. He looked up. 30 meters to go. The upper section was worse. Smooth granite with minimal features. A seam system on the right side. A crack barely visible, but climbable if he worked it correctly. The angle was dead vertical now. Maybe even slightly overhanging. So how do you climb an overhanging crack system? Laybacking. Hands pulling on the crack edge. Feet smearing against the wall. Body in tension. It's exhausting. Every muscle fighting physics. Your shoulders burn within seconds. Your fingers cramp. But it's the only way up. Webb started up the seam. 5 meters up the seam. His right hand slipped. For one moment he swung out from the wall. Held only by his left hand jammed in the crack and his feet smearing. The M4 pulled him backward, gravity winning. He was going to fall. He didn't. His left hand held. Fingers locked in the crack like steel. He swung back to the wall. Found purchase with his right hand. Reset his feet. Kept climbing, but his hands were shaking now. 10 meters from the rim. The gunfire above was constant. The PKM fired in controlled bursts. A K-47's cracked. He could hear voices. Pashto or Dari. He couldn't tell. Shouting coordinates. Calling targets. They had no idea he was directly below them. 7 meters. His fingers were going numb. Not from cold. From exertion. The pump. What climbers call it when forearms fill with lactic acid and blood, when your grip strength fails and your hands feel like they're made of wood. He shook out his right hand, hung from his left, shook out his left, hung from his right. Bought himself maybe 30 seconds of recovered strength. It would have to be enough. 5 meters. The crack system ended. The final section was face climbing. No crack, just tiny holds scattered across smooth granite, crimps and edges that required perfect technique. One mistake, and he'd peel off the wall. Webb placed his right foot on a crystal the size of a dime. Trusted it completely. Stood up. His left hand found an edge barely deep enough for fingertips. 3 meters. He could see over the rim now. The Taliban position exactly where he'd mapped it. Rock outcrop shaped like a fist. Sandbags reinforcing the forward edge. 4 fighters visible. 1 on the PKM. 2 with AK-47s, 1 loading an RPG, all facing south, focused on the American assault team below, 2 meters. Webb's right hand reached the rim. Solid granite, flat edge. He pulled, got his left hand up, mantled, and rolled over the edge into a small depression behind the Taliban position. He lay flat, 10 meters from the nearest fighter, behind them, in their blind spot. His hands shook so badly he could barely key the radio. Phoenix, this is Webb. I'm on the objective. Silence. Then Morrison's voice, barely controlled. Say again? I'm behind them. 30 meters west of the main position. 4 enemy. Prepared positions. Requesting immediate CAS. Stand by. Webb pulled his M4 around. His fingers were too numb to feel the trigger guard. He flexed them, forced blood back into the tips. His breathing was too loud. He was certain they'd hear him. But the gunfire was too intense. They heard nothing. He pulled a green smoke grenade, removed the pin, threw it 20 meters west of his position, away from the enemy, marking a clear reference point. Green smoke billowed into the air. The radio crackled. 2 F-16s inbound. 3 minutes. The Taliban noticed the smoke. Confusion in their voices. 1 fighter pointed. Another swung his AK toward the smoke, searching for targets. Webb pulled the red smoke. Threw it directly at the Taliban position. Red smoke marked the enemy. They panicked. Someone shouted. The RPG gunner scrambled for cover. The PKM machine gunner swung the weapon around, searching, but they were looking at the smoke, not behind them. Webb sighted his M4. Center mass on the PKM gunner, 50 feet. Impossible to miss. He fired. 3-round burst. The gunner dropped. The other 3 Taliban fighters spun around. Saw him. Raised weapons. Webb was already moving. Rolled left behind a boulder. AK rounds cracked past, sparking off granite. He blind fired around the edge. Not aimed, just suppression. Cass, this is Webb. Danger close. 50 meters west of red smoke. I'm in cover behind boulder. Clear, hot. Webb. Confirm danger close. Confirmed. Drop it on the red smoke. 30 seconds. The Taliban were maneuvering. 1 flanking right. 1 moving to Webb's left. The 3rd laying down covering fire. 20 seconds. Webb pulled his last green smoke. Threw it at his own position. Marked himself clearly. Green smoke is friendly. Red smoke is enemy. Drop on red. Copy. Guns hot. 10 seconds. The flanking fighter appeared around the boulder's edge. AK raised. Webb saw his eyes widen in recognition. Webb fired first. 2 shots. Center mass. The fighter fell. 5 seconds. The F-16 rolled in. Webb pressed himself flat against granite. Covered his ears. The GBU-38 Joint Direct Attack munition hit the red smoke with GPS precision. 500 pounds of high explosive detonating in a position carved from solid rock. The concussion wave was a physical force. Compressed air that slammed into Webb's chest, knocked breath from his lungs, filled his ears with ringing silence. Rock fragments and dust blasted outward. Heat rolled across his position, searing even 30 meters away. When the dust settled, the Taliban position was gone. Scattered sandbags, scorched rock, no movement, no return fire. Webb keyed his radio. His voice came out hoarse, barely functional. Objective, clear. 4 enemy KIA. Position destroyed. Below, the American assault team pushed forward. No resistance. The ridgeline that had held for 6 weeks belonged to Bravo Company. 40 minutes later, Lieutenant Keller reached Webb's position. Webb sat with his back against the boulder, hands shaking, unable to hold water from his camelback without spilling. His fingers were bleeding from multiple cuts. His forearms looked like someone had beaten them with a bat, swollen, purple, barely functional. Keller stared at the cliff edge, at the rope still hanging down 60 meters of granite, at the destroyed Taliban position 30 meters away. You climbed that. Under fire. Webb nodded. Who authorized this? No one, sir. Keller was quiet for a long time. Then, you saved a lot of lives today, Webb. Webb said nothing. He was thinking about the 2 Taliban fighters he'd shot. Kids, probably. 18, maybe 20 years old. Fighting for reasons he'd never understand. Dead now because he'd climbed a cliff they thought was impossible. He didn't feel heroic. He felt exhausted and shaken by how close he'd come to falling. The platoon medic checked his hands. Minor lacerations, severe muscle strain, possible stress fractures in 2 fingers. Nothing that required medevac. They descended the conventional route. Took 40 minutes. Webb's legs were rubber. He stumbled twice. Morrison caught him both times. When they reached Firebase Phoenix, word had already spread. Spider-Man had climbed the unclimbable cliff and called airstrikes from behind enemy lines. Some soldiers cheered. Others looked at him like he was insane. Both reactions were probably correct. Webb went to his hooch, lay on his cot, and slept for 14 hours. 3 days later, Captain Hendricks, the company commander, called Webb to the TOC. You violated about 6 different protocols, climbing with unauthorized equipment, conducting a solo assault without orders, calling danger-close airstrikes without proper clearance. Webb said nothing. You also probably saved 15 casualties and secured a position we'd been trying to take for 6 weeks. So what happens when you break every rule and it works? Hendricks slid a paper across the desk. Recommendation for Bronze Star with Valor device. Write a statement. What you did, how you did it, why you thought it would work. Make it detailed. Webb wrote 3 pages. Technical climbing descriptions, tactical reasoning, assessment of enemy positions. He didn't mention heroism or courage. Just methodology. Just problems and solutions. The Bronze Star was approved in November. Presented at Firebase Phoenix with no ceremony. just company formation at morning roll call. Hendricks pinned it to Webb's chest, shook his hand, and formation dismissed. Webb folded it into his rucksack and never wore it again. But something else happened. Quietly. In places most people never hear about. In December 2009, instructors at the U.S. Army Mountain Warfare School at Fort Drum, New York, began studying Webb's assault. They reviewed his written statement, examined photographs of the cliff face, calculated risk versus tactical advantage. By 2010, they'd incorporated it into curriculum as a case study. Unconventional vertical approaches in mountainous terrain. The technical term for Webb's simple idea, combat free climbing for reconnaissance and targeting. Students at Fort Drum learned that standard doctrine, never climb under fire, had exceptions. That terrain could provide concealment where technology couldn't. That sometimes one soldier with climbing gear could achieve what an entire platoon with air support could not. The method was taught at Mountain Warfare School and later at Marine Corps Mountain Warfare Training Center in Bridgeport, California, never as primary doctrine, too specialized, too dependent on individual skill, but as an option, a tool in the kit. In 2011, a Marine sergeant in Helmand Province used a modified version of Webb's technique to scale a 50-foot cliff and mark Taliban positions for artillery. In 2012, a ranger element in Paktika Province employed similar tactics during a village clearing operation. Webb's climb entered the quiet archive of innovations that happen in war, not publicized, not glorified, but remembered by those who needed to know. After his deployment ended in March 2010, Marcus Webb returned to Bend, Oregon. He married Emily Carson, a teacher he'd known from high school, in a small ceremony at a state park. He worked as a forestry technician for the U.S. Forest Service, managing trails in the Deschutes National Forest. He coached his daughter's soccer team. He climbed on weekends, always alone, always the same basalt cliffs he'd climbed before the army. He never spoke much about the Korengal. When asked, he would shrug and say, "Just did what needed doing." In 2018, Webb was killed in a logging accident while clearing a hazard tree on Forest Service land. A widowmaker, a dead branch that falls without warning. He was 36 years old. His obituary ran 11 lines in the Bend Bulletin. It mentioned his military service in one sentence. Marcus served honorably in Afghanistan with the 173rd Airborne Brigade. No mention of the climb. No mention of the Bronze Star. Nothing about the cliff that shouldn't have been climbable or the position that shouldn't have fallen. His grave is in Pilot Butte Cemetery, marked with a simple veteran's headstone. Most people walk past without noticing. But every year on September 23rd, someone leaves a small cairn of stacked stones at the base of his headstone. 3 rocks, balanced carefully. A climber's memorial. There's a temptation to call stories like this myth, to think they're exaggerated for effect. It's easy to believe that wars are won by overwhelming force, by technology, by strategic brilliance operating at division and corps levels, by the expected methods, firepower and maneuver, doctrines taught at West Point and Quantico, soldiers who follow orders and execute plans precisely as written. But the truth is more complicated. Wars are decided in moments, when protocol fails and someone has to improvise. By people who see what others miss, who understand that the mountain doesn't care about your doctrine, that it only gives you what's there, and sometimes what's there is exactly enough. Marcus Webb wasn't a special operations soldier. He didn't graduate ranger school or attend advanced training. He simply understood that conventional approaches sometimes fail and that terrain can be an ally if you read it correctly. His father told him, "The mountain doesn't care about your plan." Marcus proved the corollary. If you understand the mountain's plan, you can climb anything. He didn't win the war. The Korengal Valley would remain contested for 2 more years until the Army finally abandoned it in 2011, concluding that the strategic value didn't justify the cost. But Marcus Webb saved 40 lives on September 23, 2009. And in war, sometimes that's everything. Put yourself at the base of that cliff. 60 meters of exposed rock, enemy fighters above you, your platoon taking casualties below. Every manual says, never climb under fire. Every officer would call it suicide. Would you have trusted your hands? Would you have made the climb? What shocked you most about this story? That the Taliban position held for 6 weeks? That Webb climbed under active fire? That the method is now taught at mountain warfare school? Which moments stayed with you? The slip at 35 meters? The 2 fighters Webb shot at 50 feet? Or the quiet return to Oregon where nobody knew his story? Let us know in the comments below. If you believe that quiet courage deserves to be remembered, that the rules sometimes need breaking by those who understand why they exist, share this with someone who thinks heroism only happens in Hollywood. Because sometimes the smallest climb casts the longest shadow.